All right. Hello once again, everyone. This is Bob Turner coming back at you live, as I always say, with another episode of the Summit Podcast. You know, some weeks go by and I don't do any. This is my second one this week, so I guess we're back on a roll. They come in waves, and it just kind of goes by inspiration. And when I meet people and come across people, I'm saying, hey, let's do a podcast together. So this past week, I connected with this week's guest, Jamie Elizondo from the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And it was very, very apparent that we needed to get on and talk on a podcast because he's a coach. He does keynote speaking, leadership development. He spent a bunch of time in professional football. And I said, I need to get this guy on. So Jamie, welcome to the Summit Podcast.
Bob, thank you, man. I'm excited to be here and really pumped up for our conversation today. So thank you for having me on.
Well, you're welcome, and I'm appreciative of you taking the time. And I always know it's going to be a good conversation when I have to when we're kind of shooting the breeze and the info, and I go, oh, hang on, don't stop. I got to press record now. Sometimes I've talked with somebody for 10 minutes or so, and shoot, I should have recorded that. But I appreciate you being here. And I always with the guests that come on, one of my perspectives or what the take I do is like, what can I learn from this person, right? And you and I do some of the same things, and I get really excited when I say, "Oh, good, he's a few laps ahead of me on what I'm trying to do, right? Which is just help other people." But I did a little research on you, and I saw you spend some time in football, and then now you're doing the leadership, you're doing the coaching, the performance coaching and speaking and all that. Got a very impressive website, guys. I'll link it to you. But how did you end up making the transition? Are you still involved with football? I guess is a question.
Yeah, that's a great question, Bob. Football will always be a part of me. When you spend 22 years in pro football, and I was blessed to be at the collegiate level, and I was blessed to be at the professional football level most of my career, mainly as an offensive coordinator and a quarterbacks coach, but fortunate enough to be a head coach at one point. There came a time when I knew the game was getting younger, right? And I knew there was going to be a transition plan. And my focus has always been on trying to have impact on people. That's why I got into coaching in the first place. And this concept of trying to take people throughout my career from high potential, which by the way, in football, if you're labeled with a P word, the potential, that can be deadly. But bridging that gap from high potential to elite performance, it has always been something that's fascinated me. The mindset behind it, the brain work. How do you actually make that gap and that jump? And why are some people able to do that more effectively than others? So I knew there was going to come a time, and I knew that the type of impact that I wanted to have. So I started to create my own company and focus on these three pillars that we talked a little bit about before of how I wanted that to look.
That's fantastic. One of the questions that comes to mind is like, and we talked about it in the beginning before we hit record, is you've been around some winners and you've been around some people that are trying to win, and not many make it in the big scheme of things, right? Not many, fraction of the people that are trying to get to that level make it. From a mindset standpoint, what's the difference between the two?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think there's so many aspects to that. But the first thing that comes to mind, and I was fortunate enough to be in the same meeting room with Tom Brady in
Mm-hmm.
the New England Patriots, same meeting room with Drew Brees in the New Orleans Saints, and actually spent some time with the Saints. One of the things that jumps out at me first and foremost is the level of intentionality that those two guys approached every aspect of life with.
Mm,
And you could see it. It was a different level of intention, but it didn't show up just in aspects. It showed up in everything that they did.
right.
Drew Brees had an amazing gift of making you feel like you were the most important thing in the world. When he talked to you, and it didn't matter if it was the cafeteria lady, the gentleman that picked up the trash, or me as a guest coach, he made you feel like you mattered. And it was an incredible level of intentionality that carried onto the football field and that you could see in the meeting rooms and you can just see in every aspect of his life and Tom.
Yeah, haven't been as fortunate as you to say, hey, be in the same room as Tom Brady, but I've always thought that well, there's a lot more that gets said behind the closed doors. Am I right?
Absolutely. And when you say that, there's a level of intensity that I think Tom Brady brings that is on a different level. And I think the great ones bring that level of intensity. Not only that intentionality, but that intensity to every meeting, to every conversation, to every single rep and everything that they do on a football field, sometimes that spills over,
Mm.
especially when you're trying to demand that out of your teammates.
Do you think that what was he, 199th draft pick? Not the most talented guy in the room ever, really. When until he got going. But do you think that the fact that he didn't come out and say number one pick had a lot to do with the trajectory of his career?
I believe so. I think that there's something that when we've all been told that we're not good enough, that we're not capable. For some people, I think two things happen, Bob. Some people take that and it becomes part of their identity.
Mm-hmm.
They develop that, they believe that, their subconscious says that. And then I think the people that succeed in life, that truly get to that elite level of performance, they're the ones that say, no, I'm worth more. I'm capable of more. And I'm going to craft that path for myself. And that belief constantly feeds itself. And you have to nourish that. That's not an easy road. That's the hard road. Right? The easy path is to say, yeah, I'm good. I'm comfortable. I've developed some level of success. But to be able to see not only how Tom Brady, but to have that entire organization operated was really a blessing for me.
Yeah, that's something else, and we've all heard that or heard that comment. Hey, you really think you can do that, or which is pretty much saying, okay, I know what you think now. And one of the acronyms that you and I have heard kicked around is that JWM, right? Just watch.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead. I had somebody tell me years ago, well, you're probably not going to be much of a runner. What do you think I was thinking about running a marathon or an Ironman? I used that for fuel every single day, even in trainings. That's good. Yeah, and there are a couple of different types of people: those that believe it and those that don't. Those that hear the noise, those that create their own.
Yeah, and I'll share this story with you because I think it's relevant to what we're talking about. I was in law school, and I'm fortunate enough to have finished my law degree, but I was volunteering at the University of Maryland, my alma mater, and I was
Mm-hmm.
stuffing recruiting envelopes back in the day when you still had them in the mail. And let me tell you, I volunteered for 6 months, Bob. My fingers were cut up. I'd go back to law school class. People would say, "What are you doing? Like your fingers are all." And but for 6 months, I stuffed those envelopes. And boy, let me tell you, I was a good envelope stuffer. Okay, so I did it well. After about 6 months, I got an opportunity to visit with the associate head coach, and he knew I wanted to coach football. And he called me into his office, and I was ready. This was my opportunity to really say, I'm ready to step in that role and onto the football field, whatever capacity, quality control. And the first thing he says to me, "So you want to be a football coach?" And I say, "Yes, sir." He says, "Well, you'll never coach college football."
Thank you.
Because I'm actually doing you a favor. You should go down the hall and be an athletic director.
Wow.
And you should follow that track because you didn't play pro football and you didn't play college football. So you might coach high school football. And no disrespect to high school football coaches. There are amazing high school football coaches in this country, but I was respectful and I turned away and fast forward to, many years later, and I was named one of only 41 coaches in the world as a professional head football coach of the Edmonton Elks. And I thought back to that moment and I thought, boy, would that path have been different if I let that little voice,
Right.
speak. So I think we've all had that. And I think it just depends how we use it to drive us.
Absolutely. You used it as fuel. Excuse me. That's cool. This is great. I did a little homework on you, and I'm curious about your processes, the ICE method, and the crush it principles. Could you touch on those? These are things that you speak on, and they're part of your methodology. Tell us about it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And the crush it principles are fun, and we've all heard that term, right? Like, Bob, you're gonna crush it. And I heard that actually when I was going down very early in my career to take one of my first football jobs, and I was going down for an interview, and I never thought much about it, but it was kind of a seed that lasted in my brain, and I thought, what if we actually build an acronym out to what crushing it looks like, that we can measure winning, or success outside of wins and losses, outside of profit and loss. And so the crush it principles are simple, right? If you are truly crushing it in life, one, you're living with courage. So the C stands for courage.
Yep.
The R stands for resilience. Right? The U stands for an unstoppable identity. The S is for showing up, our energy, our presence, how we show up every day of every moment in life.
Mm-hmm.
The H stands for the high performance habits, which is a platform I coach off of, and we can talk more about that. The I is for internal discipline, and the T is for tenacity. And if you are following those principles, there's no doubt you're crushing it in life. But here's what I love about it, where I took it and what we're creating here. We can change the acronym
Mm-hmm.
depending on the situation. So, what does it look like if you're crushing it as a leader? You might be connecting,
Right.
you might be reliable, unifying, right? And so the idea here is what does crushing it as a dad look like? What does crushing it in your workouts look like, right? And so we can change the acronym, but the idea here is really simple. Courage and resilience get you into the arena.
Yep.
They're just the ticket in.
Right.
Your identity, that unstoppable identity, how you show up, and your high performing habits, they get you onto the podium. But discipline and tenacity, they get you to the top of the podium. And so that's kind of how I've broken it down and love speaking on it. And I love kind of the framework of it. There's a program that's coming out in a couple of months on the Crush It principles. And so I'm really excited about it.
Well, that's great. And I'm at a point where I'm kind of developing my own vernacular, like with the edge and all that stuff. And it's fun
Yeah.
because it makes you do a deep dive and ask yourself, as a coach, as a leader, like, what do I stand for? You know,
Mm-hmm.
what's important to me? What if I had a young person in front of me, what would I want them to know?
Yeah.
Right. And
Absolutely.
and going along with that, am I walking
Yeah.
as a
Absolutely.
in my own life and all that? So nothing keeps you more dialed in than having some coaching clients, right?
Yeah.
You're like, well,
Absolutely.
gotta get my stuff done.
Yeah, and I love that reflection piece because the more, and you're in the coaching space, the more you coach, that's exactly, you grow more from looking back and saying, am I congruent with the things that I'm coaching? Am I getting up at 5 in the morning and getting the workout in? And am I doing the really hard things that I'm
Mhm.
asking others to do, right? And I think that's one of the benefits of coaching. That's one of the things I've always loved. But it all starts with courage,
Yep,
the
you're absolutely
courage to
right.
take that.
Yeah, I think back to the things that I've done, and like I got to if I applied this to my triathlon stuff, it takes courage to sign up. You got to be resilient through training. You can go right down through this. So
Hmm.
I love this. This is great. Tell me about the ice method.
Yeah, so I'll share it in this room. A lot of people don't know what happens at halftime of a football game from a coaching perspective,
I
right?
bet it's not
You
pretty,
come in, you've only got 14 minutes. And let me tell you, the ride down from if you're up in the box, that takes 2 minutes, and you got to get so you really have about 10 minutes of actual coaching adjustments. And so a lot of times those adjustments can dictate how you do in the second half, the second half of the game or second half of life.
right?
And so what I tried to build was a process for decision making, a process for critical thinking, for how to make adjustments, right? At whether it's a halftime of a game or halftime of life. And so the acronym stands for identify. Right? And there's three steps under that. Identify the issues, identify the impacts, right? And so on and so forth. Create, create a course of action, create some concepts, right? Create an awareness of the outcomes, and then execute, right? And so oftentimes, and the reason I tie this in is oftentimes we're quick to make change without the critical thinking piece.
Mm.
Was the game plan not working because the game plan is wrong or the players weren't executing? Did our product launch fail because it was a marketing issue or because it was an not advertising, a product defect? Right? Was it not situated well in the market? So the ICE process gets us to actually go through a number of steps to critically think about the adjustments or decisions that we're making moving forward. And, sometimes, as you've seen many times in life, you make an adjustment, could be in your training, in your thought process, and it's the wrong one. So that's what the ICE process does. It's a critical thinking, a strategy thinking tool.
I like it. You mentioned high performance habits.
Mm-hmm.
I know you've got some high performance habits. Talk to me about that. I know it's one of the things that you speak about. It's part of your fabric. Let's talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, I love that because I think, when you talk about the Tom Brady's, when you talk about the Drew Brees or anybody that's been successful in business, they all have some concrete habits. And what I love about this framework that I coach off of, and I'm fortunate enough to, I don't know why so many CEOs have fallen on my lap, but that's who I tend to coach the most. The high performance habits come from the world's largest leadership study on what drives high performance. It was a study that was conducted in over 190 countries, had over 10 million data points, 2 million surveys, a bunch of coaching sessions. And here's what the high performance habits study found. There's three things that we all want. We want higher levels of joy, higher levels of connection, and then more confidence. Right. And I love asking people like, hey, Bob, have you ever met anybody that's like, I have enough confidence. Thank you. I'm good. Right. Or I have enough joy in my life. I don't need any more of that.
Right.
But what the core habits came out is there are core concepts like clarity, courage, energy, influence, right? Mindset, persuasion. And so that's the framework that when I'm sitting with a coaching client one-on-one that we work through a process-driven, outcome-driven framework. Right. And what I love about it is that it's based on the world's largest leadership study, but it's also based on neuroscience and psychology.
That's cool. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, thanks. It made me think when you're talking, like sitting here going, I wonder how this guy operates when he gets around a negative Nelly.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of those. And so I'm going to ask you to clarify, is it I'm just around them or I'm coaching them
Well,
or a little bit of both?
a couple like on a coaching situation, but also like socially. You're at a function of whatever, and you get that guy, and he's just gonna be, And I'm always like, well, yeah, hey, but right?
Yeah.
How do you handle those people?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good question because there's plenty of them,
Hmm.
right? And so the first thing I do with anybody I think is really important is I'm going to listen to you,
Yeah.
right? Because what I found in coaching is, and this was from whether coaching football or coaching, if we don't connect,
Right.
then there's no trust. If there's no trust, I can't challenge you. I can't move you. Right. So the first thing I got to do is create that connection piece. And so I listen.
Yeah.
And then I try to find a positive
Yeah.
and say, hey, listen, you just told me everything that's straight. What is great in your life?
Good.
I love asking that question.
What's great in your life?
What was good this past week? And I try to frame it, Bob, in the sense of energy. Like, man, we're here, we're connected. Let's get some good energy. Like, tell me something good.
Yeah.
Right? And that tends to at least bring awareness, right? And then I can start bringing in more of the positive, tools. I think one of the things I found in my class on positive psychology is we all have a negativity tilt because negative feelings are more sticky, positive feelings are more fleeting, right? So in every coaching session, one of the ways I do this in coaching is I'm going to ask you what were the wins this week. And here's what happens. When we do that, here's what neuroscience teaches us. We're now thinking from our PFC, our prefrontal cortex,
Hmm.
and that broadens us, right? If we think negative, the weather's so cold, it's too sunny. And there's a great commercial, and I don't know if you've ever seen it with kids. And it's like, the noodles are too noodly,
Right.
right? The chips are too crunchy, right? And so it's just like, but when we're thinking narrowly, we're operating from the amygdala, which is the emotional center of our brain. And we become narrow. So my job as a coach is to broaden you right away so that we can become more creative, focus on problem solving, just more strategic in general in our thinking.
In that same kind of in that same category, you've been around a lot of young people, and when you get one that maybe has some pretty good ability but a lack of confidence, low level of confidence, how do you handle them?
Yeah, another really, and I appreciate the question. Everything I do is centered around eradicating doubt, right? And I think that that's such an important part. We don't talk enough about confidence, and we don't teach it.
Sure.
How to develop it, how to nourish it, how to grow it, how to create an environment where we actually cultivate it Right? And that's what I love about the study with the high performance habits is, yeah, that's one of the things we all need more of, especially in today's world.
Hmm.
So when we talk about confidence, I always start with what are the doubts, what are the beliefs that we need to tweak here, right? And what's a belief? What's something that you need to believe about yourself that will create that higher level of confidence that you need to adopt about yourself, right? And so this is where a lot of the wiring is done, right? Because our confidence is often tied to our identity. And
Right.
so those two are interconnected. So I always, that's something that is a process, driven program, right? And I'm fortunate enough to have my mental performance mastery. So I do a lot of work in this space because at the end of the day, that is the most important thing we can do for young people is help them eradicate that doubt.
Help them show up in their as their best self, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think back to this stuff, and when I was in sports, and I didn't go on beyond high school to play, but I played three sports and was active, and I think that nobody ever really asked me what my mindset was.
Yeah.
Like, hey, how you feeling today? Are you confident? I don't know. Just get out there and get it done. And so we've come a long way in how we treat not only young people, but just athletes in general, but also like in the professional world, we're paying attention to it, right?
Hmm.
Now it's not good enough to just, if you're with the right company, it's not good enough to just show up. They want to know that you're all right, that you're dialed in. Companies, I think, are taking care of their people better. And they hire guys like you to come in and say, hey, we want to work on some team building. We'd like to learn more about leadership. Do you do a lot of that in the corporate setting?
Yeah, I do. For some reason that seems where I have been focusing most about 2024 and early two part 2025 is coming in and not only on the leadership part, but on building the culture out, right? And that's really as a football coach, that's what you do every year. You're constantly building culture, and in fact, it's a constant process. I love talking about culture because it's not like you just tack it on and say this is our culture and you put it on the wall.
Put it up
It
on.
changes every day with a person in, person out, with an injury. And so I spend a lot of time on the leadership track and on how we build teams through setting of the right culture. And one of the things that I think is important here, it's not just about values, right? And in fact, when you think of what the New England Patriots had on their wall, which we all familiar with, right? They had three sayings: do your job, know your role, and put the team first in everything you do. Those were fundamentals that I call that are action oriented behaviors. That's what we try to do in companies rather than respect or communication or teamwork. Want to put some actionable behaviors, right? Because culture is felt, right? And so what are those repeated behaviors that we do every day in business, right? And I call those fundamentals. And we build those fundamentals out very much like the fundamentals of throwing and catching,
Sure.
dribbling in basketball, right? Passing the puck in hockey, whatever those things are. So I spend a lot of time with those fundamentals, and what are those key fundamentals that drive success in that company?
That's cool. You do a bunch of speaking. Who's your? Would you rather speak to a football team or a corporation?
Yeah, both. I really love both. I've been fortunate enough to speak to some professional football teams. That's always fun because that's my natural space, right? In fact, with one team, I did crush it as a team. And
Nice.
what does that look like? And incorporated that in the teammate component of it. But I think each one is unique and different. And at the end of the day, here's what I love about the speaking part. I'm not a get up. I'm a high energy guy. You can already tell that.
Hell yeah.
But I'm not a get up and motivate you. And
Rah rah rah.
I'm a performance coach. I'm a mindset coach, right? And one of the things that's always frustrating in the speaking space is we've all been to those speakers that motivate you and you feel good when you walk out, and then there's no change 2 weeks later, right? And so you're like, okay. And so what I try to incorporate is, yes, let's do the keynote speaking, but then what's the 6 month plan in a company? How
Right.
are we going to drive the behaviors that create change? Right? And that consistency, because at the end of the day, I think that's one of the things that we all struggle with
Yeah.
is how we can be consistent, right, in building and making the changes that we want to see in our life.
Well, you mentioned impact, and I had the good fortune to go out to Memphis a couple of weeks ago and speak to a group of contractors, and I took them through some team building stuff and took them through some leadership training, because these are contractor guys. That might be the owner there, that might be the guy that runs the shovel. And we did some things, and I was just getting ready to leave the next day, and a woman walked up and she said, flagged me down and stuck my head out the window. She said, "I got to tell you something." She goes, "You changed my life. You changed
Mm.
how I look at my marriage." And I looked at this woman and I said, "Wow." I'm thinking to myself, it occurred to me, I'm in the right space. So how do you, I mean, have you had those moments too where you just realize that, I'm having some impact. People are noticing and listening to what I'm saying. And the feeling that I've had that I have more to give is spot on.
Yeah, first of all, awesome
Thanks.
for
Yeah.
for that for you, because that, and I want to honor you and celebrate you for that, because that's why we do this, right?
Yeah,
That's why
absolutely.
we that
Yeah.
and I think that that's one of the things I learned really early on. I was coaching in high school before I even started on my collegiate track, and this one kid came up to me at the end of the year and he said, "Coach, thank you, for really helping me out.
Yeah.
Right? You saved my life."
Yeah.
And in that moment, Bob, I thought to myself, I was going through the Rolodex. This kid never came up and talked to me. Like, he never said he had a problem. And I said, "I really appreciate the words, but you never, you know, brought a problem." He goes, "No, coach, just how you were every day and how you showed up for us every day really changed my life. I was thinking of, killing myself." And it was a moment that froze me, Bob. And I apologize because it brings back some emotion there.
Oh, yeah. No problem.
And I never knew, and you never know the impact you have on somebody. Right. And so that for me was a defining moment of why I wanted to continue coaching and impacting people.
Yeah. If there was ever a question, that answered it.
Yeah, exactly. So I honor you. I celebrate you, man. And I think that's why we do this. And what that impact looks like for me long term, if it's one person, then I'll be fulfilled.
Right. I heard something one of my clients actually said on a group call last night. I was talking about people get engaging in the group, and she said, "Don't try to change everybody. Try to change one." Something
Yeah.
like that. I probably butchered it, but it
Yeah.
was, you're not
Yeah.
going to get one
Yeah.
and go from there, right? So we're all just looking for that little nugget or that little morsel of like, all right, I'm here. Somebody's listening. I'm doing the right thing. My first exposure to that was when I started blogging about my triathlon exploits and funny race stories. And I stopped for a bit and I ran into a woman in the grocery store. And she says, "Hey, you haven't blogged in a while." I said, "You were reading them?" She said, "Oh, yeah, I read every one." I said, "I didn't know." She said, "You're really good at that. Keep doing it." So sometimes it's just that, not that we hang our hat on what everyone else thinks, but to hear somebody say to you, after one of this podcast, "Hey, I listened to your podcast with Jamie. It was really good. Keep doing what you're doing."
Yeah.
And it's sometimes it's just that the discipline, the showing up, the consistency. Like, I do Tuesday nights I'll go live in my Facebook group. Sometimes nobody shows up.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be there, just like you with that kid, and I'm gonna be there. And hey, if they have to watch it on record, so be it. But when you're in the right space and you're doing what you feel like you're supposed to be doing, stuff just comes naturally, doesn't it?
It does. And you know what? I was thinking as you were saying those things, it's like you embody everything you just said there embodies the crush it principles.
Yeah,
Think about, how you showed up in those moments when you didn't want to show up as a triathlete,
sure,
right? When you didn't want to, think about the habits you had to build out, the discipline
right,
and the tenacity to say, "I'm going to show up for the Facebook group,
right.
regardless," right? And so I think that's awesome. But I think that's why we do this, is because ultimately I look back, I waited too long in my life to get a coach. And I wish I had had a coach when I was younger, because I'll say this, and I'm honest. I stepped into one of only 41 jobs in the world, and I failed as a head coach for a lot of different reasons, some of which were not in my control. But one of those reasons was I needed a coach. I was coaching everybody.
Yeah.
Right. And so if I can have that type of impact and bring that awareness to somebody that's younger, right, that can guide them, then it's worth it.
Well, and when you make those experiences pay for you over time, like you've made that, what you've said, hey, I feel as a head coach, you're making that pay. You're using that to teach lessons that will carry on for generations. So, man, this has been great. I've enjoyed chatting with you. One of the things that I like to ask people, and sometimes I'm surprised that I always remember. But when I was a couple of years back, I was actually down in Foxborough having dinner with Ben Newman.
Yeah.
He said, there's an edge to everything you say.
Yeah.
Like dude, the excitement, the energy that comes off you, like you bring people to the edge. Like I would follow you, like, okay, what do we do with that? He goes, the edge, I think, is, and he said, you don't have to tell anybody. But I bet I tell everybody. I credit Ben with coming up with that. And so I've built out, our group is called The Edge Live, and the book that I'm writing is called Finding Your Edge. So I ask everyone that comes on the podcast what their edge is. And my definition of it is, where you go, what do you summon when the proverbial shit hits the fan, if you will? And how do you show up differently than others? And what is it that's different about you? What different thing do you bring to the table that maybe others don't? So I'll ask you, Jamie, what's your edge?
Yeah, it's a great question. I can't wait to read your book. So you're
No,
gonna have to
about a
tell me
month.
when it comes out.
Okay,
Yeah, I think we're coming out with one at the same time. So
good,
we'll swap. Okay, deal.
nice, deal.
Yeah, and I think that I'm gonna reflect back to something you shared with me earlier, and that's what other people said to you. And somebody said this to me, a while back. Says, you know why you're different, Jamie? And I said, I'd love to hear. And that's a loaded question. You're just like, I'm not sure which way this is going to go. And they said, you have a unique ability to relate to a ton of different people from different backgrounds and environments and connect with them. You can talk to an inner city kid just as well as you can be in a boardroom filled with, the board of directors, just like you can talk to somebody from Alabama, somebody from Japan, and more importantly, you connect with them. And so I'm going to use that as a reflection piece that's something that has brought to me. I'm going to continue to think about what my edge is, but I've always let other people say those things for me. And I think one of those things that comes to mind as you share that is the edge is something that you feel about somebody, and there's a difference. And I think that we both experienced that with Ben,
Yeah, for
right?
sure.
But yeah, I think that that rare piece is my ability to connect, and that's as we said earlier, the driver, because that establishes trust.
100%.
And when we have trust, then we can begin to make the changes in your life that you need to make.
Love it. Love it. No, I appreciate it. And I've taken a lot of notes, and I don't know why, because I'm recording this. So I'm like, what are you doing? Taking notes on the podcast. But I like to hear what you're saying. And I appreciate you being on. Thanks for being so vulnerable and transparent. It's really cool when I get someone on like that, and it means we're able to establish trust.
Mhm.
As we head out of the locker room, so to speak, today, I'll just turn it over to you. What is it? What would you like people to know?
Yeah, one, that you have everything inside you that you need to accomplish what you want to accomplish. And that's what a good coach does. He helps you see the things that are inside you already. And coaching is not I'm going to tell you what to do. It's I'm going to help you find that fire, find that fuel, but you have everything you need. And number two, you are worth it. If you can eradicate the doubts that are in your mind and dream of achieving that higher level and bridge that gap and go from this high potential to this elite performance in all areas of your life, then it's a life that's going to be much more fulfilling and joyful. I don't know. I'm here if anybody wants to reach out. I'd love to just connect with you because I just like connecting with people. But the one thing I'll leave it with you is whatever you do, make sure you crush it on a daily basis. So, yeah,
Love it.
yeah.
Guys, this has been Jamie Elizondo. If you get to the Dallas Fort Worth area, where my daughter lives, and that's where I'm going to be heading here pretty soon. I'm going to look you up. I'll be out there mid-January, so maybe if you're around and you're not traveling, we can grab a cup of coffee or something. Would love to spend a little bit more time with you. Thank you, thank you, thank you for spending the time. And those of you that are listening to this, thank you for taking the time, because there's a lot of podcasts out there and a lot of ways you can spend your time today, especially in the personal development world. I'll say this, the journey that we're on, getting better every day, whether it's 1% or whatever it is you're doing, is never finished. And I appreciate you guys taking the time to listen to the Summit podcast. Jamie, thank you. Guys, we're out. This has been the Summit podcast. We'll talk to you real soon. Thanks again.
Thanks, Pop.